Welcome back. You're on part 2 of the Amari Fingerless glove, and you've got to the point now where you're ready for finishing, and we can also have a look at the wonderful customization you can do to create a really individual style on this glove design. And of course, pop across to my Etsy shop where you'll catch all of my other original crochet patterns. Now we've completed the glove so far, repeating that 4-row pattern repeat 6 times beyond the first 4 rows in order to get the size that we needed. Now we're ending on a 3rd or 5th row to make sure we're at the bottom there, the cuff. Now I'm just going to measure it and show you that we want this to measure 2 to 3, possibly 4 centimeters smaller than your finished hand. And we want that stretch then of the glove to give you a lovely fit. Alright, so it's really important you don't make this to the same size as your hand or you'll find that it will stretch. So that last row, we're working back down to the bottom area where the cuff ribbing is. And a quick reminder, we are working in US terms. We've got 10 stitches making up the cuff position. And on this row, row 5 of the pattern repeat, this is the yarn over slip stitch, which creates a really nice ribbed effect. Check out my 12-ply ribbed glove. It's unisex and it predominantly uses the yarn over slip stitch. Now this is in the back loop, creating that nice ridge effect. So let's work down to the end of the row, and we've completed now, ready for doing the seaming. So as I place this over my hand, you can just see that it's needing a little bit of stretch to come around to fit, and I'm really happy with the length and the look of this glove. The ridged area there is your back loop only stitching that you do. That is the right side, and on the inside when you look you can see it is a much smoother profile. So we're going to be working with the glove with the right side inside, right sides together, and the wrong side. So we're working at the top end of the glove where your fingers would poke out, and we're just counting down 5 stitches. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It really helps. Thank you so much. Now we've counted down 5 stitches. We're just going to pop our marker in, count down 5 stitches on the other side. That is your original chain you started with, and just hook them together. Remember, right sides together. We're working at the cuff end, and we're going to just pop our crochet hook back through the loop, our last area that we finished, and we're going to be picking up the stitch on the opposite side. This is the chain that you originally started with. So pop your hook through the very first stitch, bring your yarn over, and just draw it through and through the loop on your hook to get started. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pick up 1 stitch from each side under both loops, and on the other side picking up 1 stitch. So the hook goes through each stitch first, then you bring your yarn over your hook, draw it through the 2 stitches, and then continue drawing it through the loop on your hook. And this is a slip stitch, again under both loops of that first stitch, and then grabbing the stitch on the other side, so we're wanting to keep our stitches even so that it sits nice and square. And that's slow-mo for you so you can see exactly what I'm doing. So we're going to be working slip stitches all the way up until we have completed 14 stitches. So that will be the 10 stitches of the cuff and up into 4 stitches of the starting pattern. So don't do these too tight. Leave a little bit of tension off as you bring your loop through, so that this seam is not too tight and doesn't pull the glove up, but gives you a little bit of easing and comfortable wearing. So just have a look at that and see how it feels. Give it a wee tug. You just want to make sure it's all sitting nicely. And of course, if we turn it inside out, we can have a look at how the finished seam will look once we've turned it through. So it's pretty much invisible. You don't really see it. One thing you can do is, if you want to, pick up the first loop only of your stitch, and then your second loop on that first stitch side would then create like a back loop effect, which would give you that wee line. That is something you can play around with, and I will show you that later. So we're just continuing here to complete until we have done 14 slip stitches. Now this is creating the gap for your thumb. You can customize this however you wish. If you prefer to have a much smaller opening, or you need a larger opening, then obviously adjust it accordingly. Reduce or increase the amount of stitches. So I will try this on, but it's a little tricky to get a totally ideal fit here because we've got the stitch marker, but you can see where the base of the opening begins and where the closure, for me, that's a nice comfortable position. However, you're quite able to adjust this to however you would like it to fit. Right, so let's continue now. So what we're going to do is we're going to work across the far side of the thumb opening, and we're just going to do single crochets into each stitch. So pick up the next available stitch in the chains and create a single crochet. So the hook under the stitch, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Hook through, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Single crochet US terms. So we're going to be working up 12 single crochets, which will be the opening for the thumb, finishing on the stitch just before the stitch marker. So in essence, it is the 6th stitch from the top. Now I just popped that marker out, so I'm just going to count back down 5 stitches, and the 6th stitch, pop my hook through, grab the loop and draw it through, and this now closes up the thumb opening. Now I'm going to work into the next stitch, which is the 5th from the top, and into the stitch that the marker is in, which again is the 5th stitch from the other side. Just pop your marker out and create your slip stitch. And again, not too tight, grabbing 1 stitch from each side, slip stitch, and seam this last area of your glove. Now if you do make adjustments to the pattern by adding length in the cuff or the length of the hand pattern, you need to keep a note of this as to what it will change when you come to making your thumb opening. Just make notes as you go along if you need to, if you have made any changes in this area. Right, so the last slip stitch, and we have completed the seaming. So there's your thumb opening. Let's pop the glove on again and have another look now. It'll be a lot easier to see that we've got the fit where we want it. There we go. Now we are going to do a top few rows to finish off the glove, and keeping it still positioned with the right side inside, we're just going to now place the marker at the halfway mark. This will then ensure that you get your stitches across the top as even as possible. Now for the medium-sized glove, which is 29 rows in total, we'll be doing 15 single crochets up to the stitch marker and 15 single crochets around to the end before we close off the round. If you have decreased the amount of rows to get the sizing for your hand, or increase the amount of rows, you will of course need to adjust the amount of single crochets in this first row that you complete. So we're just going to work to our marker and then continue around to the end. So we're going to work 15 single crochets. So basically it works out at almost 1 per row. So 1 chain, and then just work your single crochets as evenly as possible around the top edge. I find it's important to be careful not to pick up just one loose loop of yarn in case it tends to pull up and create a hole. So just place your single crochets in the best possible position so that it looks neat and tidy once you've worked it around. So you can see I'm just going to go under slightly there rather than through the top loop, just to make a nice finish. So we don't want these stitches again to be too tight. We don't want this edge of the glove to be tight as such, but we are using these rows in order to stabilize the stitching. Alright, so if you have increased the rows, then obviously you will increase the amount of stitches across. So we've done our 15 single crochets. We're going to take out our stitch marker and then continue a further 15 single crochets around to the end, where we will then slip stitch and close up the round. So we're at the end of the round, our last stitch, and then we're just looking for that very first stitch. We've got a chain and our first single crochet. So we're just going to put our hook under the first single crochet and slip stitch to close the round. Okay, 1 chain, but we're not going to turn the work. We're going to continue keeping the right side of that inside of the glove looking at you as you crochet. Now picking up the first stitch directly under where you have done your slip stitch rather, we're going to do our first single crochet back in that very first stitch we created, but we're going to make it in the back loop. Okay, so we're just going to do another round of single crochets, but this time in the back loop of each stitch, so that we just get a little line for detailing on the formation of this round. So you should have 30 stitches, and you'll just work your way around again to the last stitch, working a single crochet in the back loop, and then slip stitching under the first single crochet we did. We're going to pick up under both loops, pop your hook through, draw through and draw through to create a slip stitch. Now we will create a chain this time, and this time turn. We're going to now do our last row, and it's important when you work this row that you always are working with the wrong side of your work to you, so you've turned. So work a single crochet directly below in that very first stitch, and then we're going to chain 1, skip 1 stitch and work in the next stitch, and we're just creating standard single crochets here, popping the hook under the 2 loops of the stitch. So a chain in between each one, skip a stitch, single crochet, chain, skip a stitch, single crochet, chain, skip a stitch, single crochet, and this needs to be worked on an even number of stitches. So if you have done a variation and made changes, then just keep that in mind. So as you can see, we just get a slight little bit of you've got of course the line from the back loop and a little bit of scallop, just very minute edging to create a nice finish to this. So when we get to the end, we're going to do our last single crochet, and then we're going to do an invisible closure. So instead of doing a slip stitch, we're going to work our last single crochet, and then we're going to work like we're doing a chain. But first of all, pop your hook out, trim your yarn so you have a tail which you will then be sewing in. Draw that thread through, So we've just got to crochet like we're doing a chain, but draw the thread right through, and then pop your yarn onto your large eye darning needle, and we're going to then go across to our very first stitch that we created. We're going to pop the needle underneath the 2 loops of that stitch, just drawing up slightly. We don't want these stitches to be tight, so what we're actually creating is we're giving the illusion of those stitches just continuing. So popping it back down into that last chain effect, see how we've created what looks like 2 further stitches, one there and one there. Now your needle is facing on the inside. We need to bring it through to the other side, ready for us to do our sewing in of our end. So you can see that it's pretty much invisible for you to be able to tell where you've actually finished, compared to if you slip stitch and tie off, you often get a bit of a knot. This is an invisible way to do it. So I would then just pop your needle through, and generally I tie off so that it just secures the position. So there's a bit of tension there, stopping the stitches from wanting to necessarily pull or open up. And then at this point I'm then just going to sew in the rest of the tail down through a few stitches in one direction and then back on itself. Now if it feels reasonably encased and thick and there's not movement of your yarn, then probably 2 goes back and forth of this is fine, or you may want to come back in another direction for a third amount of drawing your thread through. And the point of this is to ensure that with the movement and stretching of your glove, your sewn in yarn is not going to pop out and reappear. There we go, snip that off, and that's that done. So it's very hard for us to be able to see where that seam at the top has finished, where the stitching has finished, and if we turn it through, then have a look at that seam. All really lovely. And the top, it's not too lacy, not too much of a picot finish, just a nice wee edging. Okay, so now we are ready to start working on the thumb opening and deciding what sort of finish you would like. So I'm personally not a great fan of too much of a thumb cover, but I have created in the pattern a cover for those of you who do like to have that area of the thumb closed in, to give a little bit more extension there. It could be left completely plain, or just a couple of rows like we did at the top of the glove to finish off that area so it doesn't look completely raw in its current state. So we're going to be working around with the right side, creating a similar finish to the top, but a little bit longer so that you get some cover over your thumb area. So let's turn it through to the wrong side, and then we're going to be working so that the right side of the glove is sort of looking at us. And I think once you actually see me doing this, you'll understand what I mean by that. So starting at the point which is at the end where the cuff has finished, where we finished doing our seaming on the cuff end, is where we will begin the crocheting of our thumb opening. So just popping your hook through right at the seam position, you will have created a slip knot. So into the first stitch, pop your slip knot over your hook and draw your hook through in that stitch. And we'll just do one chain to get ourselves started, and then we'll work back into that same stitch, but we're going to be doing it in the back loop. So just work in the back loop of the stitch. Now that first one I did standard, so let's just continue with this in the back loop. And you'll be working the required number of stitches up to the top. Now again, depending on whether or not you have decreased or increased your thumb opening, you may need to make some adjustments here. You want to just keep a note of how many single crochets you did across your thumb opening if you changed it from what the pattern said, and therefore incorporate this when you do your thumb finishing. So we're working up to the top end, and in this instance we'll do our last stitch, which would be 12 single crochets, and then we're going to work one stitch into that seamed area. So just in between there we're going to pick up one more stitch. So what we're going to be achieving here is 12 stitches, one in the seam there, 12 down the other side, which will then create 25 stitches. So we're looking at having an odd number of stitches at the end. When you get down to the very bottom, work in that last stitch. Remember, these are all single crochets worked in the back loop, and we are now going to do what we did like at the top of the glove and create a slip stitch in under that first single crochet, popping the hook under and drawing through and through the loop to secure. Now we're going to do one chain, and we are not going to turn our work but continue working the round. So again, you're looking at the right side. We're going a single crochet in the back loop in that stitch directly that we've just finished in, 1, 2, and a third single crochet, and this is going to be a decreasing row. This will allow us to create some shape. So we're picking up a loop, and then the back loop of the second stitch, drawing through the threads, yarn over the hook, and single crochet. So let's just do 3 more stitches. So just follow the pattern at this point, and again you may need to adjust this if you have made this opening smaller or bigger. So 1, 2, 3 single crochets, all in the back loop. Then pop your hook in the back loop of the next stitch and grab it, then roll across to the next stitch, back loop, draw through both of those, and now complete your single crochet. Now this does a invisible single crochet stitched together in the back loop. So now we're working across the top area of the thumb opening. Again, your single crochets are all worked in the back loop, so we get that nice little line detailing. Pick up that back loop when you're ready to do your decrease, then pick up the back loop of the next stitch, draw through those 2 loops, and then yarn over and complete your single crochet. And this creates a decrease single crochet back loop with an invisible effect, so you don't get a bulky stitch. It's near impossible to actually see what you've done. So we're working down to our last 3 stitches. Sorry, I think it's 4 stitches there, doing another decrease single crochet in the back loop, and then our last, yes it was 4, our last 2 stitches single crochet standard stitching in the back loop, no decreases there, and so we've created some shaping. And now we're going to close up with our single crochet. So do follow the stitch count of the pattern to get this right. Now this time, again, we've got one more row to go before we turn our work. We're doing a chain. We're working in the stitch directly below where we've just done the slip stitch, and we're going to work in the back loop, and we're going to crochet all the way up to the top. So we've reduced our stitches in that first decrease round. In this one, we're only doing 1 decrease at the top of the thumb area, to help draw it in. You'll be doing a total of 19 single crochets around on this particular row to the last 2 stitches, where you'll complete a single crochet decrease in the back loop, 2 stitches together as we've done on our previous row. Then you'll be ready to close off this round. After completing the 1 decrease, so your single crochet decrease, you'll then slip stitch to the very first stitch you began with to close off your round. Okay, 1 chain, and we are now turning. So this is our last row. We needed to have an even number of stitches to make this work. So again, we're going directly, first single crochet will be in the very first stitch that we've just done our join with, starting with a single crochet, and we're there doing 1 chain, skipping a stitch, and a single crochet in the next stitch. Now it does get a little bit fiddly, and I apologize for the visual. It's not easy to necessarily see my stitches. It's a small little area that you're working, and it isn't easy to get the camera angle correct for this. Just skipping a stitch each time, 1 chain, skip, and come round, and then we're going to of course do again our invisible closure when we get to the end. So we're just going to pull up that last loop. We've ended on a single crochet. We're going to create like a chain, but draw the thread through, not tightening it off completely, but creating like that chain look stitch, popping our yarn through onto our darning needle, and then we're looking for the first stitch and the 2 lines or loops of that stitch, popping the needle underneath, pulling it through, and then popping our needle on the other side down into our chain so that we form another stitch that looks like the top of the crochet, single crochets. You can see that. You just sort of even play around with it to make it nice and even. The thread is of course facing through to the right side. We want it to come through the other side, so we'll just pop that needle through, bring it forward, and then we're now on the wrong side with our thread, so you can't see which of those stitches was the last stitch. Now I have got a little bit of a hole there, so as I do this closure and do the first join up, I am going to just try and grab a little bit of that there, pull it enough so that it sits evenly but not too tight. So like I did with the top of the glove, I like to then secure the yarn at that point and tie it off so that the stitches will remain nice and even with the wearing of the glove, and then I continue sewing in the yarn down through the seamed area, just weaving the thread in and out, coming back again in the other direction. We'll just cross back and come back up that way. And I found that this thread felt fairly snug in that area with the stitching that had been created with the slip stitch, so wasn't necessary to do a third time. So I'm just going to trim that off, and there we have it, all finished. So of course I need to sew in that other thread from the beginning of our thumb, which was where our our slip knot was. So again, same thing, just pop it onto your darning needle, and again, if you've made or found you have any little sort of holes, just bring those together as you do this sewing in of your yarn. Right, so that's all done. Wrong side there. We've completed our thumb opening. You can see we've got some shaping in there. It gets smaller as it goes around, but you've also got a nice angle there for the position of your thumb. So let's just turn it through and have a look at our finished glove. So this is, as per the pattern, a medium with a full thumb cover. And you can see the little lines. By not turning our work as we do the single crochets in the back loop, we get that little line effect, which is just a wee bit of detailing that I really like on the edge of my borders. Okay, and I'm really happy. There's the finished Amari. Pop your glove on. I hope you've really enjoyed that. And now let's look at how we could customize both the thumb and also the length of the glove. This is the fun part with this pattern, where you can personalize the finished look for yourself. Whether you like the full thumb position or whether you'd prefer to leave the glove with a slightly more open look, as with this one. Now you could leave it completely unfinished, just the simple finishing we did as we seamed, or you could just do maybe 1 or 2 rows to give a little bit of edging but without too much detailing. So let's have a look at how we would do that. Again, we're going to just go through the same process as we did for the full thumb position, and we will simply begin in that lower position, working our row of standard single crochets around the thumb opening, working them into the back loop so that we do get that little line of detailing, which just adds to the finish. So popping our slip knot onto the hook, we've turned our glove through, we're working looking at the right side, pulling that loop through. We're going to create 1 chain, and then we're going to work into the back loop of each of our stitches. Now the position where I'm working is the area that you worked across the original chains you started with, where you did your 12 single crochets. And just keeping in mind, if you have done a smaller thumb opening, you will have needed to keep a note of how many stitches you did in order to repeat over these without increasing, making this become larger than it should be. Now in this particular one, because I do want it to sit nicely at the top, I'm going to actually work into the middle seam and then grab the next stitch, almost like a decrease, in order to just ensure we don't get any gaping or holes at the position of the seam. So then I'm just going to continue working all the way around my thumb position in the back loop, single crochets, creating 1 row. So I personally don't like a big thumb cover, so this is the way that I like to do my gloves, is just a very small finishing around the thumb opening, and it's more about stabilizing the stitches so that over time the thumb opening doesn't stretch and grow. Okay, we're right at the end now. We need to close up this round, so we've got 1 last stitch, and we're then just going to do that slip stitch into the very first stitch that we worked. So underneath this single crochet and slip stitch through, pull that thread through. Okay, now we're going to do 1 chain, and we are going to turn our work and do our last row. So working our first single crochet in the stitch directly below where we have chained, and ideally you would have wanted this row, the amount of stitches, to be an even number in order to create this little picot edging. So remember, it's a single crochet, chain, skip 1 stitch, single crochet, and these are standard single crochets under the 2 loops of your stitch, working all the way around to the base of your loop. And I'm just looking there to see if I've got, whether I need to work another single crochet or whether I can finish there. So rather than doing a slip stitch into that position, which will then create a bit of a knot, we're going to finish at this point, trim the yarn, draw that through. I created like my first little chain there, but I've drawn the yarn through, but not pulled it tight, so we're leaving that stitch open to look like the chain. This is the third time that you will have seen this invisible ending of being able to finish your work, so it looks like your stitches have just continued around and around. Placing your needle underneath your first stitch under the 2 loops, we're going to recreate a crochet stitch, or the look of. Taking our needle then down into the chain, drawing it through, and then just adjusting the threads so that those stitches look nice and even. Now we'll just pop our thread through to the other side. We need it to be on the wrong side of the work, and now I will close that off. So I've got a little bit of a hole there, probably could have done another single crochet, so I'm just going to bring my thread through that area and down and then tighten off, just to ensure that that little opening doesn't continue to grow and become an eyesore. And I've just tightened it there so that those threads will remain stable with wear. And this is like we did before. We're now just going to weave in the end of our yarn and finish up the glove as it stands. So back and forth a few times until you are happy that you have secured the yarn in a way that it is not going to want to pop out with the stretching and movement. So going back and forth on itself or in different directions is ideal with that. So let's just trim that off now. And of course I will need to sew in the other one as well. So that just creates a much smaller edging, not so obvious, and that is personally how I prefer to have my gloves finished. So you can just see the difference there of a much smaller finish compared to the pattern where you're doing an extended thumb closure. Okay, so that's how they look, the difference between a full thumb closure and just a couple of rows. And then let me show you how I have extended the length of the glove. So what I've done here is I've added length in the cuff, not the hand pattern, but the cuff. So if I lay on the original pattern next to it, you can see the difference. I've actually doubled the amount of stitches from 10 to 20 in the cuff position. I really love this look. It's particularly nice if you want to have a long cuff in underneath, say, a coat, extending through without the bulk of a glove. And it is really quite elegant, can look really beautiful. Now the other thing that you can also do then with this particular design is you can then turn the edge up and create more of a solid cuff look. Now of course you can make your cuff as long or as small as you wish, but this was just an idea on how you could create quite a different look to this particular Amari glove. I hope you really like that. I think it's a nice alternative and it's an easy customization even for a beginner crochet. So I hope you have really enjoyed the process of making your Amari gloves. Join us on Facebook and Instagram, and I will see you on the next pattern release in my Etsy shop. Thanks for purchasing and happy crocheting.